All right, back now with more on the border, which we've been talking about throughout the show today. Number one, the House moving closer to an impeachment of the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas over his handling of the influx of migrants at the southern border. And all that happening while this convoy of protesters we've been following, again, they call themselves God's Army. They've been pushing off on a two-week tour of the border opposed to the Biden administration policies. There's that and more going on, and that and more to be discussed with Chris Hahn. Chris, a Democratic strategist and News Nation contributor on our panel today, along with Melik Abdul, a Republican strategist and radio talk show host. Let me get the Mayorkas thing. We're waiting for a vote. Looks like the House will vote on the impeachment. We know the politics of it. Even if he's impeached, it's dead on arrival, probably in the Senate. But just on this idea, Melik, of impeaching a cabinet secretary. It doesn't happen often. There was an interesting op-ed in the Wall Street Journal from Michael Chertoff, who you'll remember was a DHS secretary under President Bush. And he says, don't impeach Mayorkas. And the quote was, political and policy disagreements are not impeachable offenses. In fact, that was the first line of his op-ed. So that's not a Democrat. That's a Republican saying this is not the right road to go down. But what do you make of what the House Republicans are doing here, Melik?
Well, I think we learned during both of Trump's two impeachments that impeachments really are a political exercise. I would argue it was the same with Bill Clinton back in the 90s. That was a political exercise. So, of course, Republicans are going to do this. When Trump was impeached those two times, it fell along party lines. I expect the same thing to happen here. Now, the question is whether or not there'll be enough Republicans to actually move forward with an impeachment articles. I don't think that that's going to happen. It doesn't seem as if Republicans have the number, but we'll actually see. I do know that you won't have any Democrats to support this.
Right. So no matter what happens here, though, and again, we'll get a vote on it, we think, by the end of the day, Chris, it almost doesn't matter because it doesn't mean that if Mayorkas is not impeached somehow, that this is any less of a challenge for this president. This issue, I mean, how does he navigate around immigration between now and the election? It's a real challenge for a Democratic incumbent in this environment. How does he do it?
Well, there is a bill working its way through the Senate, and rather than waste time with an impeachment, they could sit down and try to work out a deal on immigration, which Biden has signaled he's willing to do. But, of course, they want to keep this as a hot political issue for the year, and they want to please their boss, Donald Trump, who wants a scalp, and he thinks that Mayorkas is the right guy to do it. This is kind of ridiculous. A couple of months ago, we were talking about maybe Trump will become the Speaker of the House. It appears to me right now that even though he is not the Speaker, he is the de facto Speaker because he is controlling the Republican conference in the House. It's ridiculous. Well, it's a ridiculous situation.
That's not going to pass. That is, as we've said, I mean, Mike Johnson said it, the Speaker. This compromise, Melik, is dead on arrival in the House. Is this smart politics? Forget about policy for a moment. Chris said there are a lot of questions have been raised about this. Why wouldn't you just take what you can get, at least make things a little bit better from your point of view if they're Republicans? But is this smart politics, what President Trump seems to be pushing for, which is to kill this deal no matter what's in it?
A politician not wanting to do something that benefits the other party. I can't believe that we're having this discussion here. Of course, this is ridiculous for Donald Trump to actually posit this. And there seems to be more senior statesmen in the Republican Party, at least in the Senate, to realize that we need something. Now, whether or not we need a certain number, 5,000 versus 10,000 versus 0, which is what most Republicans would want. But we weren't at 0 when Donald Trump was in office. And I don't think that's realistic. But I understand the political aspect for Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, I actually do think that we probably will get some sort of border deal.
All right, final point on also on the former president. We talked earlier in an earlier segment when Doug Flynn comes on with us, talk about the business news about the stock market and everything else. Record high, right? We've been speaking about that. So here's the Trump social media post. This is the Trump stock market, he says, because my polls against Biden are so good, investors are projecting I'll win, and that will drive the market up. Everything else is terrible, and the record-setting inflation's taken its toll. So Trump's argument, Chris, is that the record stock market performance under Biden is because of him, and people think he's going to win in the fall. You say?
I don't know how anybody in America takes that man seriously anymore. He destroyed the economy in 2020. He let the stock market collapse. Millions of jobs were lost under his presidency. He is not responsible for this. The policies of the Biden administration for the last 3 years are working. The American economy was saved by Joe Biden from the disaster that was left to him by Donald Trump. And it's a ridiculous statement that nobody should be taking seriously.
Maybe.
But that said, Biden should be taking more credit for the economy than he does and pounding his chest about the stock market in the same way that Donald Trump did when he was president.
Nobody should take it seriously. Maybe Malik, are you one of the people who does, or how do you view it?
Well, let's be honest, and I was actually doing the research before I came here. This is a normal thing that people do. It was even in 2020, November of 2020, where people were crediting, major publications were crediting Donald Trump's economy pre-COVID to the Barack Obama's policies. Remember, Barack Obama said himself, "Thanks, Obama," when talking about Trump's economy. So many people said this when Donald Trump was in office. Now, Donald Trump is saying the same thing. It happens in politics. Literally
his policies that destroyed the economy, Malik.
2020
he destroyed
was
the economy. I am sorry. I'm not giving him a pass on 2020. He failed the American people in 2020. He failed the economy. He destroyed this country, and he should not be within 100 miles of the White House.
I have a habit of bringing up these contentious topics as the last question when I'm running out of time. I really got to get better at that. All right, Chris and Malik, thanks to both of you. Always an engaging panel, right?